Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Half-Life Blue Shift for PC. Now this is the second expansion pack for Half-Life 1, and it was actually originally meant to be the Dreamcast exclusive version of Half-Life. And instead, what happened was the Dreamcast version was never released, and they just decided to take Blue Shift and turn it into a PC exclusive. And it worked out pretty well, actually. It was developed by Gearbox, and it was released actually 2 years after... Well, 3 years after Half-Life 1 was released, 2 after the previous expansion pack, which was Opposing Force. So by 2001, the graphics for Half-Life 1 were extremely dated, and they figured that they needed to up those. And what they did was they actually included the high definition pack, and this was optional. At least if you get it on Steam anymore, it's optional to install the high definition pack. But what this does is it swaps out all of the models and all of the textures for higher res textures and much more detailed models. And the performance impact is really non-noticeable. I mean, well, obviously on more modern systems. But at the time, it was a much needed upgrade. But even then, it didn't look that much better. It looked okay at the time, but it really didn't look that much better. And textures were still pretty low res. I mean, it did look like a game of that generation, though, at least. That's what they were really aiming for with the high definition pack. And what ended up happening was that while the graphics upgrade really changed that particular aspect, they didn't really change much else about the presentation. I mean, the voice acting is still the same. Sound effects are still pretty much the same, and so that was pretty much all they changed between Opposing Force, the original Half-Life, and Blue Shift in terms of the presentation, was just the high definition pack. Now, like what happened with Half-Life Opposing Force, you don't play as Gordon Freeman in this one either. Instead, you play as Barney Calhoun, who is one of the security guards who works at Black Mesa, and he did go on to later prominence in Half-Life 2, of course. But anyway, what they did was they just kept the same style of gameplay, they kept the same storytelling, all that, and they didn't really add anything new. And that was the pretty major complaint about this game, apart from the fact that it's pretty short, especially compared to Half-Life and Opposing Force. It's pretty short compared to those. And the problem with that wasn't necessarily that the game's length was just short. They're like, okay, yeah, it's an add-on to the Dreamcast version of the game, basically. So they didn't expect it to be very long to begin with, but what ended up happening was it got released as a full game by itself. It didn't get released as like a small expansion pack to Half-Life. Instead, it got released as a full standalone game, and that was the problem with it. Because there is nowhere near enough new content to justify getting it as a standalone game. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's not. It's actually very good. But if you're trying to get this as like a standalone game, it's stale. I mean, you'd gone through the Black Mesa facility as Gordon Freeman already. You'd gone through it as Adrian Shepard, and then you're going through it again with Barney Calhoun, doing the exact same things you did in the first 2 games. And so it really just felt stale, like you'd done every single thing in there before. And you had, basically. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's not. It's actually pretty good. It's well designed. It's fairly flawless in terms of technical specs. I mean, there really aren't any bugs to speak of, even with the new high def pack installed. But it's short, and it's stale, and there's basically no new content. So they couldn't really, I mean, not just critics at the time, but pretty much anybody couldn't really justify getting it as a standalone game at the time. Now, when the price went down, of course, people would start picking it up. And if you get it included with Half-Life, which is how I got it, actually. I got it on Steam included with Half-Life 1 and Opposing Force. That's how I got that. If you get it like that, if it's packaged with Half-Life, if it's packaged reasonably, basically, and you're not getting it standalone, then it's definitely well worth playing. But if you're going to get it standalone, you might want to consider not playing it. Even if you're a first-person shooter fan, even if you're a Half-Life fan, I don't really recommend getting this game standalone. I definitely recommend getting it in a package, because it just doesn't feel right as its own standalone game. It feels more like a waste of money than anything else. But that said, it's not bad. It's just very lackluster, very unimpressive. So if you do like Half-Life and you haven't gotten a package on Steam where it includes Half-Life 1 and Opposing Force, then you should probably get that. But if you're going to try to seek this out standalone, don't bother with it. So, thanks for watching.